they called me on my bullshit.
Right.
I like that because I'm capable of believing my own nonsense. I'm quite capable of
Aren't
it.
we all?
I can convince myself of almost anything I want to. And I certainly do like to make a lot of money, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that I do it in a way that I feel like I haven't compromised my integrity. I haven't compromised my sense of freedom.
It's kind of good versus evil too, right? Because in wrestling, it was always sort of the good guy, and then there's also the bad guy.
It's the hero's journey.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've read that book.
Of course, yeah. Joseph Campbell's stuff.
Yeah, fascinating book. But you read that book and you realize that it all comes down to basically the same stories. That's probably one of the things that deep down inside bothers me the most, especially when it comes to my parents. I can't even really talk about that.
I'm into that. Welcome to the What is Money Show, a podcast about wisdom, intelligence, and meaning. If this is your first time listening, I strongly recommend you go through the first 9 episodes, which are my series with Michael Saylor that lay much of the groundwork for the concepts we explore on this show. Thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I think the best place you can start is episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The WiM podcast is 100% sponsor-based. I strive to be selective about the sponsors I work with and only partner with those that showcase values that align with the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, and self-sovereignty. So I'll do a few ad reads right here at the top of the show, then a few in the middle, and I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as these are hand-selected sponsors and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com.
But I was a sales manager for a food processor, and I had a game that I had designed and developed with a partner of mine, a friend of mine, and went off and had like 5,000 of these things made and shipped over from North Korea, thinking we were going to make our fortune in the game business. Got them here to the United States and went, okay, how the fuck do we sell these things now? We hadn't really thought about marketing them. We were so excited about the idea. But I eventually reached out to a guy by the name of Vern Gagne, who's he had a wrestling company that his show was on ESPN 5 days a week, his wrestling show. And he was a big supporter of amateur wrestling. I knew that I could play the amateur wrestling card with him and at least get a meeting. And I did. And he hired me to take over sales and syndication for his wrestling company. So it was really just sales. Sales is sales. It doesn't matter what you're selling, right?
Yeah.
And got my foot in the door that way and then just started doing on-camera stuff. I had been a model, print, and some commercial work. That's how I met my wife.
Okay.
And so I was comfortable, in front of a camera. And just one day they came and got me, said, okay, now grab a microphone. You're going to be Mean Gene Okerlund. Okay. And I sucked at it really bad. But I got through the day, and then he hired somebody to replace me. And he was actually worse than me. So I got the job back again, even though I didn't want it. And he kept doing that until finally, I think either because they got how you get nose blind, to a certain sense if you smell them all the time. I think they got talent blind. They didn't realize how bad I really was, so they just got used to it. And I kept the job. And I was hosting a show Monday through Friday on ESPN before I knew it. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I went to work for Ted Turner. Yeah. He had a wrestling division called WCW. I started there as talent, on-camera talent, and eventually became president of the division about what year was that? About 1998 or so. Did that for quite a while. And then.
So where did professional wrestling originate then? Because I was under the impression, I thought you were there in the beginning, but it sounds like there was professional wrestling going on.
No, professional wrestling's been around since the beginning of television time. In fact, professional wrestling was one of the first network television shows to actually turn a profit, other than news.
Okay.
So it goes back to the beginning of television time. And prior to that, it was part of a traveling circus.
Okay.
It was live touring.
Got it.
And so it's been around forever.
So when you say professional wrestling, we're specifically describing the theatrical version. That's
right.
What scripted? I don't know how.
Very scripted.
Yeah.
Very scripted. The product today is far more scripted than it was even when I was producing it. But when I produced it, I had writers that I hired from Hollywood to take these general rough ideas that people would have and then convert them to something that was manageable from a production point of view. But yeah, the writers they have now, for example, in WWE, a lot of them are Emmy Award-winning writers, directors, producers. It's quite sophisticated.
Yes. Yeah, I've heard people call it like soap operas with steroids or something.
Yeah, it really is. It's a testosterone-driven soap opera.
Yeah, and I was a huge fan as a kid. We went to WWF fan more so around the age of 8. Big Undertaker fan. This is the time of Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. Eventually The Rock.
Yeah, it's late 90s.
Yeah,
late
90s. Yeah, exactly. I'm born in 86, so mid 90s, late 90s, I guess. And I don't know, it kind of appeals to that comic book, the same thing that in me that likes comic books and I guess mythology more generally was like really into professional wrestling. It's like, it's theater, right?
It very much is.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a good friend of mine who is a Harvard graduate, Shakespearean scholar, wrote a book on Shakespeare's characters. Really, really smart guy, brilliant guy. But he got into mythology and the arts of storytelling because he was a wrestling fan growing up. He's from the East Coast, but he grew up watching wrestling, and that took him into mythology and storytelling and all the things that he pursued. And he could sit down today, he's a younger guy, probably your age. He could sit down with you today and we could start talking about a match, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage in 1989. And he could break that story down and relate it to a classical story.
Yeah.
By any number of authors.
Yeah.
So the parallels in the storytelling and the mythology of it all is very, very similar.
Yeah.
If you look at the difference between movies, for example, if you look at, there's a book, it's called 7 Basic Stories. Essentially, the book talks about the fact that there's really only been 7 stories since the beginning of time. Like since guys were drawing pictures of shit they killed on caves, while they were eating it over the fire. There's really 7 basic stories that have been retold in various different ways to make them seem interesting. But if you look at a lot of the stories that work in professional wrestling, a lot of the stories that work in feature films or that work in a book, thematically, they're very much the same. It's the hero's journey.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've read that book.
Of course, yeah. Joseph Campbell's stuff.
Yeah, fascinating book. But you read that book and you realize that it all comes down to basically the same stories.
Yeah, that has a common architecture, but they put a new sort of wrapper on it, new packaging.
Throw in a car chase here, sex scene there.
Yeah, and it's
burning building over there.
It's kind of good versus evil too, right? Because in wrestling, there was always sort of the good guy, and then there's also the bad guy. But they also would invert sometimes, like when Hulk Hogan went NWO, right? NWO, is that what it was called?
Yeah.
And so those inversions keep it interesting.
But if you look at movies, for example, and you look at the characters in the wrestling business, we call them baby faces, the heroes. Okay. If you look at the heroes of, say, the 1960s and the 1970s in professional wrestling, they were very similar to the heroes that you would find in movies, television shows. But the same thing, once Arnold Schwarzenegger came along and the Terminator, when it became okay for the good guys to be kind of a bad guy, like if the situation warranted it, it was cool to be a bad guy. Everything kind of changed. And that's I'm the one that created the NWO storyline and convinced Hulk to turn heel, which was an amazing conversation. But once that that shift took place in the audience's perception of what is a good guy and what is a bad guy.
Yeah.
It just opened up so many doors.
What inspired you to do the NWO thing? Was that inspired by one of these 7 stories, perhaps? Or
No, I was doing a lot of business in Japan at the time, and there was a Japanese wrestling company, much like ours, much like WWF, called New Japan Pro Wrestling. And in the mid-'90s, wrestling here in the United States was dying. WWF was dying. They'd come off the steroid trial, a lot of bad publicity. Advertisers weren't going anywhere near them. It was a bad time. Same was true with my company. We were number 2, but we were a distant number 2 to WWF. But I would go over to Japan. They'd invite me over there, and they'd put like 80,000 people in the Tokyo Dome for a wrestling event.
wow.
And the average, and this is back in 1994, the average ticket price was over $100
Wow.
for a professional wrestling event.
Yeah.
Today, that would be somewhere around $250.
Right.
That was the average. And the people there, the fans, they were all men in suits, women dressed up. They treated it so much differently culturally.
Yeah.
That I just decided I wanted to study why. Why is culturally, here in the United States at that time, wrestling was like, porn.
Yeah.
Maybe just a little bit cooler than porn, you know?
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was, looked down upon, certainly by mainstream and advertisers. So I was just trying to figure out why the fuck is it so much different in Japan? And I just started going over there a lot and studying it and talking to people and learning. And part of it a large part of it had to do with the fact that the way they presented it as a legitimate sport. There was less of the shtick, less comedy, less silliness. You wouldn't see an Undertaker type character over there because that was too animated. It was too cartoonish. They did have a couple. Of that type of wrestlers, but they were kind of down in the middle of the card. So I just started studying what they did, and I wanted to figure out a way to bring a more reality-based product to the United States, because that reality-based product is why it was working in Japan. So I came back here and just worked to create more realistic characters. Instead of giving guys names like Undertaker, I let Kevin Nash be Kevin Nash. I let Scott Hall be Scott Hall. And the stories that we created were plausible. They could be true.
Right.
As opposed to fantasy.
Right.
Strictly comic book type stuff. I started integrating more real life stuff into my stories. Things that were really happening with people and they were making headlines. I'd find a way creatively to weave it into a story. So basically what I did is I confused the fuck out of the audience.
Interesting.
I wanted them to be in a mental state where they knew they were watching professional wrestling. You can't insult people's intelligence. But you can also do things that make people, and here's my goal. Here's my goal. 8-year-old Eric Bischoff was watching professional wrestling in Detroit with his grandmother, Agnes. She was a real bitch. It's the only time we get along is when we watch wrestling. And even at 8 or 10 years old, I'd watch it and go, okay, this stuff, but these two guys really do hate each other. And that's what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted people to watch it, not offend their intelligence, trying to convince them it was real, but also create moments, situations that were so outside of what they were used to seeing. They had, by default, that they believed it was real. And I kept them in this funky gray area. They weren't quite sure what they were watching was real or not.
That's so interesting. I've heard Eric Weinstein use this term kayfabe. If you've heard this one before. But so is it sort of blurring the line then between reality and fiction to some extent? Because so the guys you mentioned, I think they were Diesel and Razor's Edge, right?
Razor
Ramon, sorry. And you turned them into just
Scott Hall, Kevin Nash.
Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. So you're making them less comic book character, more relatable, human. And then you said you were blending in real world events into the storyline. So is that you're sort of getting people subconsciously to just more buy into what's happening? Is that the trick here?
Yeah. I mean, look, in feature films, you have, first of all, phenomenal actors and actresses. You have special effects.
Right.
You have CGI. You have all these tools that you can use to allow the viewer to forget that they're watching
Right.
a performance.
It's an escape kind of thing.
Once that part of your brain, I think it's called the amygdala, that part of your brain that responds to emotion, once you trigger that,
Yes. The amygdala, right?
amygdala,
Yes, yes.
then it communicates to the frontal cortex and you experience emotion.
Right.
Once that connection happens, you forget all the logic goes out the window,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you get sucked into the story as if you were there.
Yes.
And that's what we tried to achieve with wrestling. We didn't have all the bells and whistles and
Right.
CGI and all the other things, but we had other tools that we could use.
So then how do you, I guess, fabricate a real emotional drama between two of these characters? Like what is it that makes it real? Is it getting them to actually have some tension between them? Like how do
The
you
same
convey
thing that
that?
makes any good movie a good movie. It's the dialogue. It's their ability to emote and to react, so that if you and I were going to wrestle and we're out there and we're doing an interview, your ability to convince the audience that what you're saying you actually feel, and it's organic and it's authentic. And that's just acting. That's just performing. It's no different than anybody else. With wrestling, it's a little more violent.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be because
Sure.
that's what it is. It's the nature of the product. But it's all designed to allow how did I used to say this? I would give the audience permission to get sucked into my story
Right.
by doing things that weren't clearly fantasy. They weren't clearly professional wrestling.
Gotcha.
For example, Scott Hall, perfect example. When I brought Scott Hall in for the very first time, typically, now my show was live too, so that gave me certain advantages. But typically when a wrestler would come in from another organization, for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, you'd do these video packages and you build them up and you'd hype them up. You get everybody excited. So when they showed up, you'd get the reaction that you were hoping for, right? That's what typically people would do. I went, okay, well, I want to do something different. So I had Scott Hall come through the crowd. Like he didn't even have a ticket to get in. You know, he didn't come in through the backstage. He didn't make his entrance the way all the other wrestlers made their entrance, right? He came in his street clothes and came down through the crowd and interrupted a match while it was happening. That's never happened before. And the fact that it's never happened before and people weren't used to seeing it, they went to their default, well, this must be true.
The shock value.
Because if otherwise you'd have come through the audience or you would have come through the entrance. So just those little things that you could do that were really just different, and different led to default kind of getting sucked into the story.
Got it. So the novelty just sort of interrupts people have a certain expectation, I guess, of how the match or matches are going to flow. And then if you interrupt that with some novelty, then there's sort of snap back.
Whoa,
yeah.
What's that? It's like if you turn on the news and your host or your newscaster just sat there and stared back at you. You're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
They're normally halfway through their third story by now. What's he staring at?
How do these characters get developed? Is it just like the writer is writing the character and then basically the actor is following the script, or is the actor participating in the creation of the character? Like, how does that?
Yeah, it's always different. You know, depends on the talent, of course. The best characters, as Steve Austin is a good friend of mine. He actually worked. I fired Steve actually before he went to the WWF. We joke about it now. Steve Austin was a guy who struggled with the various characters that had been developed for him by people like me, not necessarily me, but people like me. And he did his best, and he did okay.
Yeah.
But after I fired him, he kind of struggled for a little while. He had some injuries and some other issues, but once he kind of got his head straight, he started working again. He started experimenting with different characters that felt comfortable for him because he had the freedom to do it. He was out working the independent scene. There was no real boss, right? Yeah. He could go out there and pretty much do whatever he wanted to do. And in the process of doing whatever he wanted to do, he found Stone Cold Steve Austin, which is really, if you knew Steve, his real name is Steve Williams, if you knew Steve Williams, the difference between the character of Stone Cold Steve Austin and the person Steve Williams is about that thin.
So he does a great job, obviously.
It's natural for him.
Yeah.
All he does, and he's a smart guy, obviously. He knew how to turn up the volume on certain aspects of his character that were aspirational. Like what person watching professional wrestling doesn't want to tell their boss to go to hell?
Yeah.
You know, or tell off a supervisor.
Yeah.
That's what Stone Cold Steve Austin did with Vince McMahon, right? So he found that by turning up certain aspects of his character, turning up the volume on them, it worked. And it worked.
He was, I mean, one of the most popular wrestlers ever, I
Still
guess.
is to this day.
Yeah.
He made tens of millions of dollars just in T-shirt sales.
Wow.
He was one of the highest paid performers out there. For
And
a
what
long
about,
time.
because he was doing the beer, he would slam a beer, right?
Yeah.
So was he selling beer too?
No, although he does have his own beer brand. He's had his own beer brand called Broken Skull IPA. You can only get it in California that I know of. But no, that was never part of the gig. Beer, it was funny because in professional wrestling, it's such a weird business. Advertisers look at professional wrestling one way. Fans obviously look at it a different way, but advertisers look at professional wrestling as still, to this day, they look at it as primarily a kid's audience. It's not. The core audience is 25 to 54-year-old male by a mile. There are kids watching it, but it's predominantly a male, older male demo. Advertisers are just, when it comes to beer and alcohol, just won't go near professional wrestling. Despite the fact that it's delivering ridiculous numbers.
Because there's kids watching.
Because there's some kids watching.
Interesting. Okay.
So they don't go near it.
The farm at Okefenokee is a revolutionary new regenerative agricultural community. It features an 8,000 tree olive orchard, which they use to make their own olive oil, as well as a very large pecan orchard. All the animals on the farm are heritage animals, with some varieties over 100 years old and others thousands of years old. Fresh eggs are produced daily by the farm's chickens. Also, there are over 1,000 beehives that pollinate the over 200 heirloom fruits and vegetables and provide honey to all the residents. The farm makes its own molasses, unrefined sugar, herbs, and spices. The farm also features an herbal apothecary and a commercial kitchen. These are just a few reasons why the farm is the healthiest place on earth. To learn more about the healthiest place on earth, go to okefarm.com and use discount code BREEDLOVE for $21,000 off custom cabin pricing. Again, to learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and be sure to tell them I sent you. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. I haven't seen this documentary, but I've heard it's really good. The one about Bret Hart, where he has his whole family, right, was wrestlers. So does this become like a generational sport? I mean,
It can, certainly. Bret Hart is a good example.
Yeah.
Although there are many other examples. Randy Orton, who you may not know, he's kind of a current superstar in WWE. Been around since, he's been in the business for over 20 years. Really super successful guy. I'm friends with his dad, and his dad used to wrestle, and his dad used to wrestle. So it can very easily be generational, and there's a lot of examples of that.
Has it become like a Hollywood type subculture where if you're, because The Rock too, right? Wasn't his dad a wrestler and then got him into the business?
His whole family.
So that's what's happening? Is there's, fathers getting their sons into the business kind of thing, knowing the right people, or
it's all of the above. It's less organized than Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's less structured than Hollywood because there's really only one big player, and that's WWE. And now it's Ari Emanuel, who's
And
the
WWE, is that WCW and WWF merged or what?
WWE purchased WCW from Ted Turner
Got it.
back in 2000 or 2001.
Okay.
So right now you've got WWE, which is owned by TKO, which also owns Ultimate UFC.
Yeah.
Ari Emanuel oversees both of them. You know who Ari is, right? He's one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. So WWE is now very much Hollywood, but that's only been that way for the last year and a half or 2 years. Prior to that, it was still run like a family business.
Gotcha. And are the wrestlers themselves actually actors, or are they wrestlers that become actors, or what's the path to professional wrestling?
Well, the path to professional wrestling is, I mean, there's a million different ways. I mean, there's fascinating stories about how people got into professional wrestling. Some of them are predictable. You know, I grew up watching and always wanted to do it. But a lot of them are very, very unique. People that never thought they would see themselves in professional wrestling. I've worked with guys who were NFL Hall of Famers that absolutely love professional wrestling who never thought they would get involved in it. But it kind of replaces the contact and the physical part. You know, you're an athlete, you know.
For sure.
When you get used to contact, I know it sounds really creepy and weird, but I kind of miss it.
Of course.
And just the overall competitive aspect of it. Certain people are driven, I think, by their need to compete and perform and push themselves, and yes, even contact for those of us that are that bizarre. But wrestling provided that outlet for them. You know, Kevin Green, you know, was a phenomenal player, great guy, good friend of mine, Hall of Famer. He loved wrestling more than he loved football. Sorry, Kev, maybe that's an exaggeration. But he liked it a lot.
Yeah.
And Steve McMichael, Chicago Bears, same thing. You know, he absolutely loved professional wrestling.
Yeah. Wow. And then, so what is the determinant of who is, I guess, succeeding? Is it just T-shirt sales? Like, who's the most popular wrestler? Like, who ends up being the main ticket? Because I remember, again, it was Stone Cold was big. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, I remember when they had their match, that was like the biggest match of all time at the time. Maybe they had more than one, actually. Later, it was like Undertaker and Kane. Like, what determines, is it just ratings, I guess, on television that determines which wrestlers are at the top of the heap? How does that work?
There's a lot of metrics now, as you can imagine, with technology. You know, it affects everything. You know, the obvious one is television ratings. You know, you can look at your weekly rating for the overall rating for your show, and you can get a feel for things. But you also get quarter-hour breakdowns, which gives you a little more granular look at who's doing what when. And then you even have minute-by-minute ratings that are available to you. So you can literally look at your format and say, okay, Robert Breedlove was wrestling at 8:07 p.m., and this is the rating at 8:07 p.m. So you can tie. Now, that can be very misleading, too. You can't just dump all your eggs in that basket.
Sure.
That's one data point.
Yeah.
But if you learn, and it's just instinct and experience, but if you learn how to read those data points and how to interpret them without putting too much weight in any one thing, but to look at the kind of the average,
the whole picture
across the board, it's all audience reaction. But T-shirt sales are a part of it. It's an indicator. Yeah, it's not the only one, but it's a good one.
And then I assume toys, action figures, video games were really big when I was a kid too.
Video games are huge.
Yeah.
You know, video games. It's funny. A lot of the best video games that are out there had their start somehow, some way in professional wrestling.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good ones out there. And a lot of the people that are developing, I've been involved in developing one or two of them. It's fascinating how much people acknowledge professional wrestling as being kind of the catalyst that got them involved in other forms of video games.
Yeah.
But those things usually come after the fact, meaning if Robert Breedlove broke into the professional wrestling business 2 years ago, and it's just because it takes a long time. It takes about 5-7 years for your character to really, before you're going to know if you're really going to be successful. That doesn't happen overnight. Like anything else, it doesn't happen overnight. But after, the producers have been watching Robert Breedlove's performance, and we see what's going on with ticket sales. We see what's going on with ratings. We see what happens when, and a lot of it's just reading the crowd. One of the best indicators I used to use, I would just put on a hat and a pair of sunglasses, and I'd go sit up in the cheapest seats. If there were no seats available, I would stand up in the rafters, and I'd watch the show with the audience. Because I learned, for me at least, typically guys like Vince McMahon, others would go back and they'd watch what was going on a monitor, right? And have their headsets on, they'd be glued to the monitor. But you can't feel anything. You can't feel the crowd reacting. When you got headsets on and you're looking in the little fucking box,
Right.
You don't feel anything.
Yeah.
So I used to go out and I would just close my eyes and feel the crowd. And I would, like, if I felt them reacting to something, I opened my eyes to see what they were reacting to. And that's how I knew who needed a little bit more of a push, or maybe I'm putting too many eggs in this guy's basket. It's not really going to work, because the audience will tell you if you learn to listen to them.
Yes.
That's the hard part, though, because I'm a personality, pretty aggressive, always have been. I'm very impatient. I have no patience for anything or anybody. Unfortunately, I'm not proud of it. It's a flaw. I'm learning. But when you're a personality like mine, you have to really learn how to trust something other than your own instincts.
For sure. Yeah.
Your visceral instincts.
So you're actually listening to market feedback in real time. Yeah.
That's the amazing thing about professional wrestling is, unlike any other business, I would go out every Monday night in front of a focus group of about 15,000 people that would tell me exactly what they like and they didn't like. And it's your ability to read that and use it, take advantage of it, that is the difference between being very successful and not.
And then were you successful? You said you made these trips to Japan to figure out why they were taking it more seriously than we did in the U.S. Were you successful when you created the NWO and changing the image of wrestling in the way you wanted to?
My reaction is going to sound so conceited and self-important, but it's a fact. When I took over WCW creatively, it was about 1995. I had a meeting with Ted Turner. He called me into his office, said, Eric, and I was there to talk about distributing wrestling in China. It was a completely different agenda for that meeting. And I sat down with Ted. So I've never had a meeting with Ted one-on-one. I'd met with him, but not as a part of a group. So now it's one-on-one. My boss was there. And he said to Eric, what's it going to take for WCW to be competitive with WWF? And he wasn't expecting that. He knew I wasn't going to bullshit. I'm pretty good. I can bullshit with the best of them, but I wasn't going to bullshit Ted Turner. That wasn't going to work. So I just was honest with him, and I said, well, Ted, they're Monday night prime time. We're Saturday night at 6:05 Eastern, 3:05 Pacific. There is no competing at that on that level. And he looked at a guy by the name of Scott Sassa, who was the heir apparent to Turner Broadcasting at the time, said, Scott, give Eric 2 hours every Monday night head-to-head against WWE on TNT, which TNT was the flagship network. That's where all the money was going.
Yeah.
And
this was Monday Night Raw was WWF, right? I remember when you guys launched
Nitro.
this to compete. Yeah.
Yeah. So I knew I had to do something different. Well, this was right about that same time that I was going over to Japan and realizing that we needed a more reality-based project. When I took, at that point in 1995, WCW, the division I was president of, was generating about, when I took it over, it was generating $24 million a year, and it was losing $10 million a year in the process. By 1998, I was generating $350 million a year and spinning off about $80 million in profit.
Wow.
In 48 months.
Wow.
Yeah. More importantly, if you go back, and I'm not encouraging you to do this, but if one were to go back and look at the WWE product, because the name of my podcast is 83 Weeks, derived from the fact that I beat WWF head-to-head 83 weeks in a row.
Wow.
They were number one. By miles, they were number one.
Yeah.
Within a year, I reversed that and beat them 83 weeks in a row, over 2 years in total, but 83 weeks in a row. about 1997, November of 1997. Now, I had been pretty much mud stomping WWF for a year and a half at this point. Vince McMahon came out. He's a very stubborn guy. I actually went to work for him and became friends with him, but very, very stubborn guy. Amazingly bright guy, but stubborn as hell. He came out on television and basically told his audience that they were going to change the way they were doing business. They were going to create the Attitude Era. That's when DX, a lot of those guys started emerging. They started doing exactly the same thing that I was doing.
They copied you.
They took, because up until that point, WWF was very much a teen and preteen product.
Yeah.
All of their, if you look at their business model, probably 75% of the revenue was generated through licensing, merchandising, all of it targeted towards kids. One of the reasons why beer companies to this day are still nervous about it, because that's the way it was framed. In 97, Vince McMahon came out and said, okay, we're no longer going to insult our intelligence. We're going to bring more reality-based storylines to our audience, and basically copied the formula that I used to beat him for 83 weeks in a row. And they did a phenomenal job. They actually did it bigger and better than I did.
Wow.
They had more latitude.
Yeah.
They were able to do things that I couldn't do because of the network programming executives I had to answer to. And they turned that business around. Had there been no, and this is the part that'll be controversial, but it's true. Had there been no NWO, I don't think WWE would exist today. Because when Vince McMahon changed his model, when he replicated what we were doing, but it did it bigger and better, his business exploded. Exploded. And within 2 years, he took his company public based on the success of that transformation, and recently sold a year ago for $9 billion.
Wow. And that was the sell to the UFC.
TKO.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I love the element of imitation here, right? That you went and picked up something from Japan that was working there that we didn't have in the US, and then it was successful here, and you see it imitated again at an even higher and
much higher level.
And this is how business goes, right? This is what humans are doing all the time, is we're imitating what works and discarding what doesn't. But it's
yeah, and there's been times, people, what, do you feel guilty that you took an idea from Japan? I didn't take an idea. I didn't take a story.
Sure.
I took a page of their cultural book.
Right.
I took it I took a page out of the way it was presented as a whole, as opposed to a singular storyline.
There's I can't believe anyone would ask if you feel guilty about that. I mean, this is business, right? It's like war. It's like whatever works.
Well, it's wrestling.
Yeah.
Come on.
So that's so cool. And then what today, like, where is that model then that you imported from Japan, if we could put it that way, is that still what professional wrestling is, or has it adapted further?
Very much so. There's a couple things that I did that you still see today a lot of, and some of it I'm very, very proud of. One of the other things that I did with Nitro, and I'm going to go back, when Ted Turner said go head to head, I was so far over my head. I had no idea what I was doing. I was learning on the job every single day. I had never been in a job like that before.
It's a great way to learn.
I had never worked for a corporation before. Pretty much just a hustler and a salesman all my life, And so everything I had to learn. But when I got out of that meeting with Ted, I literally went to my office. I was in shock, and I knew I couldn't be better than WWE at that time, because they'd been doing it for a long time. They were number one. I couldn't be better at them. I couldn't be better than them at what they were good at. So I knew I had to be different than them. If I can't be better. I don't want to be worse. If I can't be better than, I don't want to be less than. I'm only left with one option, and that's to be different than and hope that it works.
Yeah.
And that's when bringing the reality in, Scott Hall and all that, that's when that was my opportunity to do that. But along with that, I went live every week. Up until that point, WWE was taped.
Oh, really?
I decided, no, I'm going to go live. Their tape. I literally, I want to finish the story. When I left Ted's office, I went to my office. I had a yellow legal pad. And I sat down and I made a list of everything that the WWE was really good at that I couldn't compete with. And then on the other side of the page, I wrote down all of the things that I could do that were different than WWE. The very first thing, their tape show every week.
Live.
Cool, I'm going live. I'm going to be different than them right off the bat. My own instinct, as well as having been involved in some research and some good focus groups. I've been involved with some really horrible ones too, by the way. But when research is good, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's just hard to find it. But in the course of doing research to create the show and figure out what the show was going to be, one of the things that I took away from all these different focus groups, and I did them in New York, Chicago, LA, Denver, Dallas, Green Bay, Wisconsin, did them all over the place. The one common denominator that I heard from everybody was we like surprises. Wrestling is unpredictable.
Right.
You never know what's going to happen.
Soap opera effect.
I went, okay, I got to focus on that. So now I'm live and I can do things that nobody's expecting, and it just takes on a different level of energy when it's live.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you're there.
Right.
So I started doing some pretty crazy shit. I would start my show 2 minutes before WWF because we were going head to head, right? They'd start at 8, I'd start at 8. I called up Brad Siegel, who's the network president. I said, Brad, I need to start at 7:58 today. He goes, what for? I said, just trust me. I'm going to start at 7:58. I already knew the outcome of the previous week's Monday Night Raw because it was taped.
Yeah.
And there were people there that would report on it. So I'd start 2 minutes early and I'd run down their entire show and I'd give away all their finishes. Thanks for joining us here early. And just in case you're thinking about flipping the channel, here's what happens over at WWF. This guy beats this guy. This guy beats this guy. This one's a no DQ. The show was really pretty boring. You might as well stay where you're at.
Wow.
And
so that was the advantage of being live.
That was one of the advantages of being live. I do the same thing at the end of the show. I would do an overrun because the shit was going on. It was so crazy. It's out of control. We have no choice. We've got to stick with the action. It was all bullshit. I'd call the network, say I need 5 extra minutes at the end of the show because I'm going to plan my chaos. I'm going to present this in such a way that it looks like World War III is going to break out, but I need 5 extra minutes and it needs to feel spontaneous. It can't feel contrived.
Wow.
So we do that.
For the surprise effect.
For the surprise effect. Wow. And really to create urgency.
Yeah.
Sales is sales, right? Creating urgency and a call to action is part of any sales pitch. And that was my call to action.
That is so
creating
cool.
that urgency.
I'm sensing these elements. I don't know what's coming up for me, but Sun Tzu and the Art of War. How you were describing,
one of my favorite books.
You wrote down all of WWF Monday Night Raw's strengths on one side of the sheet of paper.
The resources.
And you avoided those or did the opposite, right? And then you wrote down things they're not doing or weaknesses and you attacked those points. I think Sun Tzu says something exactly to that effect, right? Like avoid your enemy's strengths and attack their weaknesses. Also that all warfare is based in deception. And it sounds like the audience was primed on surprise. So you're taking away WWF's surprise basically by starting 2 minutes early and ruining the ending. And then you're adding surprise to your own show by extending it at the end and doing these other things. So was this like spontaneously coming to you or was this more conscious and deliberate in what you were doing?
It came to me whenever I was I did my best creative thinking on a treadmill.
Interesting.
Like if I was in my office or if I, in a creative meeting and I'm collaborating with 5 or 6 people, no matter how much I liked them and enjoyed working with them, it just wasn't firing, but inevitably, and it happened almost all the time when I was traveling because I had to get up and run. It was just I had to run before I could do anything else. And I was more clear-headed and creative while I was running than I was at any other time.
Always on a treadmill in the office or actually out running?
Either one.
Either one.
Either one. Some of the best stuff I've ever come up with, I've come up with at the Sheraton Universal in Hollywood.
Okay.
Because they had a great gym there and I stayed there a lot. And I would just purposely go down about 7 o'clock in the morning and run for an hour, 2 hours on the treadmill, whatever I could get in, and just think through what I was trying to achieve. And it's it's where the best ideas came from for me.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. Yeah, I get the creative juices definitely flow for me too when I'm at the gym and find myself writing a lot of notes on the phone, just thoughts coming to me. This September 5th through 9th, 2024, join me on the Pacific coast of Mexico for our first ever men's retreat, which we are calling The Art of Alpha. In a cooperative training environment at a world-class retreat center, we will be having daily meditations, movement practices, yoga, cold plunging, infrared sauna, lymphatic drainage, massage, heart rate variability training, gut health lectures, all while enjoying an anti-inflammatory diet, free of allergens and designed for optimal full body health. The retreat center is a gorgeous biohacker's paradise located right on the ocean. You can think of this place as a nervous system reset facility. At the Art of Alpha, we are seeking men who wish to cultivate freedom, wisdom, sovereignty, physical fitness, truth, and love in themselves and in those who look up to them. If you've always felt motivated to push yourself to new limits, to discover the best version of yourself, but you've struggled to find the right community to immerse yourself in, then the Art of Alpha is for you. You will be training alongside a group of men who have been individually selected for their outstanding self-discipline, virtue, and work ethic. To apply to join the first ever Art of Alpha event, go to breedloveevents.com. And yes, I did say you will have to apply as we're striving to gather a select group of men for this experience. Again, that's breedloveevents.com to apply to join us for the Art of Alpha on the Pacific coast of Mexico, September 5th through 9th, 2024. I'd like to thank my friends at Swan Bitcoin for their long-standing support of the What is Money show. Swan's mission is to help millions of people get into Bitcoin, so they built the best solution to set up recurring Bitcoin buys and automatic withdrawals into cold storage. With the Swan app, it takes just 2 minutes to sign up and start buying Bitcoin. If you're a new customer, you get $10 in free Bitcoin for signing up, and the first $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy incurs 0 fees. If you're an existing Swan customer, then the next $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy now incurs 0 fees. So if you love to recommend Bitcoin to friends and family, then Swan is the best place to start. So go to swanbitcoin.com/breedlove to get started today. Again, that's swanbitcoin.com/breedlove. I have to ask you, so we're starting this whole thing called the Art of Alpha, and it's like part of it's focused on masculinity, part of it's focused on financial prudence, and part of it's focused on ancient wisdom. But obviously you're in an industry, a sport, a business that is just all alpha guys, right? Like it's a bunch of meatheads, basically. I'm sure very high testosterone sport, to say the least. What have you learned throughout your career about what it means to be a man? And has your, I guess, definition of being an alpha man, a leader, a man amongst men, let's say, has that changed throughout the years of your career?
Of course, you know, I would hope it did. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck, right? Look, I relied because I really didn't. I graduated high school, but theoretically, I mean, really, I shouldn't have. Mm-hmm. This was back in 1973. You know, I went to a very progressive school, and the teachers would never consider not passing a student on to the next grade or graduating. I didn't go. I went to enough classes to stay on the wrestling team during a wrestling season, mm-hmm. and then I had jobs. I worked 2 jobs all the time, sometimes 3. In the summertime, I'd work 3 when I was in school. I barely showed up, but I graduated. I went to college just to party and to wrestle. I didn't have any intention of going to a class and didn't. So I didn't really have the education to fall back on. I didn't have the experience to fall back on. I was in a job that I was completely unqualified for. So I really relied on my instincts, which have always been fairly aggressive and assertive. That usually worked fairly well for me, but it comes with a price. You end up doing damage along the way too, and ruining relationships, and your reputation takes a hit. There's a cost to doing business the way I was doing it, but I didn't have anything else to rely on. as I've gotten older and learn more and see more and experience more, I think that leadership for me now is more by example and less by demand. I've become more tolerant. Tolerance not even the right word. I'm learning to see strengths in people that I probably otherwise would have not allowed myself to see, wouldn't have taken the time to see. I surround myself with people, I try to surround myself with people who are much smarter than me or talented in other ways.
Sure.
So yeah, leadership's changed a lot for me. I still believe in being aggressive.
Yeah.
I'm still never going to sit in the back of the room and be afraid to raise my hand.
Yeah.
That's never going to work. But I balance it, I think, more now than I ever have.
Is that with being very consciously selective of who you surround yourself with? Like people that are maybe able to see your blind spots or keep you in check or otherwise complementary to you in some way? Is that a big part of it?
I love being challenged.
Yeah.
You know, some of the people that it's funny, and you know, my podcast team, I've got a team of about 7 people. They're all engaged in various aspects of it, whether it's promoting or marketing or producing and editing and all the different things that we do. The people on that team that I'm closest to, and I want to say closest to, that I rely on the most and trust the most, are people that when I first met them, I wasn't sure I wanted to be around them. But they challenged me.
Yeah.
They called me on my bullshit.
Right.
I like that
Yeah.
because I'm capable of believing my own nonsense.
Yeah.
I'm quite capable of
Aren't
it.
we all?
I can convince myself of almost anything I want to.
Yeah.
And you need people around you that'll smack you upside the head and say, not really. Come on now.
Yes. No, that's a great point. Yeah, I think it's important for disagreeable people, which I assume you would categorize yourself as disagreeable, right? If you're hard-headed and you've also got a vision, strong instincts, you tend to be, that type tends to be a little bit disagreeable. I think it's important to have people that push back because otherwise you can just run off in the wrong direction, frankly, right? If no one checks you. How has your relationship to, I guess what we'd say here, money is obviously one component of success, but it's not the only component. There's also the notoriety, the transformation you actually created inside of an industry. Like that's a very fulfilling thing, right? You changed an entire business and really forever, right? That now that it's it imitated what you did then, and that process continues. How has your relationship with money and success changed, having gone through the young, hungry man that was working 3 jobs in the summer to someone who's really known in the sport and been successful in the sport?
That's a tough one, and because I have to really be honest with myself, and it's a little harder. This topic in particular is really hard. Money used to mean everything to me. It was the only report card that I knew I could depend on.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that really mattered in my life. And I never had it. I didn't grow up with it. You know, I grew up in Detroit in a crappy part of town with lower middle income environment. And fast forward in a relatively short period of time, I'm doing very well, much greater than I ever thought I could. And I thought, well, this is it. I'm there. Not even close. I don't even care about money anymore. I need it.
Yeah.
I use it to get the things I really like and enjoy. But for me, it's freedom.
Yeah.
It's all freedom for me. Yeah. Money is a part of that freedom, but so is my health.
Yeah.
So is knowledge. So is the comfort of knowing that under almost any circumstances, I can protect and provide for my family.
Yeah.
And money is a part of that, but it's not all of that.
For sure.
And I think that's what I've learned is money is, look, I still like making money. I love making money. It's what I do.
Yeah.
You know, I'm almost 70 years old and I still work as hard as I've ever worked. And I think I'm more talented than I've ever been. I have more energy than I ever have. And I certainly do like to make a lot of money, but it's not the most important thing.
Right.
The most important thing is that I do it in a way that I feel like I haven't compromised my integrity. I haven't compromised my sense of freedom.
Yeah.
I'm not going to work for anybody.
Right. Yes.
I'm not going to be beholden to anybody. I'm going to survive based on my ability to hunt, kill, and eat the things I need to hunt, kill, and eat to provide for me and my family.
That's well said, because there's a paradox with money, that you can become a slave to it, even though it's an instrument of freedom. You know, you could chain yourself to a job that you hate for 40 years just in the name of money, and a lot of people do that. Then it's like, well, is it still about freedom at that point? If you're doing something you hate to obtain the instrument of freedom, like something is amiss there. So that's really interesting.
It's the most important thing to me, and I think about it every day. I mean, I have grateful tattooed on my wrist because I have to remind myself that I have a lot to be grateful for. And one of the things I'm grateful for is I use money. I don't need money.
Yeah, that's great. It reminds me of that quote that I think it's about the mind. It says, the mind is an excellent servant, but a terrible master. And money's much the same. Like, it's an excellent servant, but if you let it be your master, well, it's terrible, right? You just won't have a good life, pretty much.
Yep.
You mentioned running when you were younger as like a means of clearing your head and getting the creative juices flowing. Obviously, you were into working out and fitness as a participant in the wrestling industry. What do you do today, like fitness-wise? How has that changed throughout the years? I assume you've gone into different practices as you've gotten older. Like, how has your physical fitness journey changed?
You know, I let my conditioning slide for a long, especially, you know, in the late 90s, 2000s, when I was really hustling, because I was working 18 hours a day. I was traveling all the time around the world. It just wasn't a priority. It just wasn't. So I let my, you know, up until that point, you know, early 90s, I was working out quite a bit. I'd, you know, gotten out of martial arts and wasn't wrestling anymore or anything like that, but I was still running. I loved to run. And then I let it go. And just within the last year or so, nutrition is a big thing for me. I mean, it's a rabbit hole that I love going down because you learn so much. There's so much new information available, and I hate to use the term hacking, but you know, there's so many ways you can increase your performance mentally and physically and emotionally. And a lot of it just has to do with what you eat.
Absolutely.
Or don't eat in some cases. That is a fascinating world for me. And because I've gotten so deep into it, my wife's been studying, you know, nutrition for 30 years. She's a holistic nutritionist. So she's rubbed off on me in a lot of good ways. But now I've gotten into weight training, resistance training quite a bit. I don't run anymore because my knee just won't let me do it.
Sure.
I'm bone on bone. I just refuse to get surgery.
Yeah.
So I can't really run anymore, but I do like to stretch a lot, going back to martial arts experience. And I'm really beginning to enjoy lifting weights. I never have. I was always, I got to do it. I'm training. I got to do it.
Yeah.
Now it's like, I'm already looking forward to working out later this afternoon.
Yeah, for sure.
The first thing I did when we got here last night was check out the gym.
Yeah.
What can I do here?
Yeah.
What can't I do here?
Yeah.
And it's fun, you know, at this stage of my life, just to be that enthusiastic about something that, you know, teenagers are excited about and just getting into.
That's great, man. Yeah, it's so good. I feel very fortunate that I told you offline I did Olympic weightlifting. That was my sport when I was young. And so that really set a tempo in my life for weight training. Yeah, it's so good. It just keeps you feeling good, and I think it's really good for you mentally too.
I mean, and again, because of, you know, nutrition and preconceived ideas that I had, I just thought, well, you know, 68 years old, I'm going to start working out now. What a waste of time that is. I was shocked. I was making gains faster than I was when I was 16 and 18 years old.
Wow.
Because you know what you're doing more.
Yes.
You know about nutrition now. And you know, you're going to spend like 2 hours in the gym and come home and eat fucking cupcakes. You know?
Right. Yeah.
As opposed to, you know, really feeding your body what it needs to maximize. And just learning that is really fascinating to me. And I really enjoy lifting weights. I never thought I'd hear myself say that.
Yeah, no, amen to that. Love it. What about mindfulness? Like the other sense of alpha that we were exploring here is like, you know, in the Bible it talks about the alpha and the omega. So like this ancient wisdom domain. Do you do any meditation, breath work, anything of that sort, or anything for the mind in general?
Yeah, I pray a lot. I have a routine. When I get up in the morning, I try to get up in the dark. It's harder in the summer because it starts getting light at 4:45 now. But I like to get up in the dark. I like to be in the dark for at least a half an hour, 45 minutes, and have my first couple cups of coffee. As soon as the light starts to break a little bit, I take my dog, Nikki, outside, and we sit on the deck, and I talk to God for about a half an hour.
Wow.
An hour.
Is this out loud or is this an internal prayer?
Internal.
Yeah.
I listen.
Yeah.
I listen a lot while I'm praying. I liked, this is going to sound crazy, but it's the way I relax. Later in the day, typically I haven't been doing it as much this summer for some reason, but we've got an infrared sauna in the house.
Yeah, I just got one installed. I'm excited.
I'll go in there for an hour.
Yeah.
And I'll listen to Native American flute music.
Wow. Okay.
And I can literally feel my brain just unwind.
Wow.
And I do breathing exercises while I'm in there. I don't know if I'm good at it or not.
Yeah.
I kind of read a little bit about it, said, okay, I'll try it,
Yeah.
and I stick to the basics. But I find that if I wait for about so if I'm in the sauna for about 15 minutes, I got to really start warming up. And then I'll listen to the music, and I reach a state of relaxation or consciousness, whatever it is. It's different than anything else I've ever experienced.
Where did the flute music come in?
I've always been fascinated with Native American culture and history.
Okay.
I live in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I live in Cody, Wyoming, and Little Bighorn's 40 miles from my house. So you grow up in it. And I've always had a fascination with it anyway. So I think this is something I've always been drawn to.
That's awesome. And so you've been doing the infrared sauna for a long time.
Year and a half.
And you're really enjoying it?
It's awesome. It's the best.
I
was kind of cynical too.
Yeah.
My wife was really excited about it, and I was kind of whatever, infrared. I'm old school. Going in, big hot rocks, pour water on it, and steam and sweat like a man.
Yeah.
What do you mean infrared? What is that? That was my attitude. And then you read. You open up your mind a little bit. You read and go, oh, this sounds like it could be beneficial. And then you do it, and you realize, what have I been missing all this time? Stretch in the sauna when your body's warm, and your ability to stretch is so much better. Yeah.
Do you alternate ever with cold plunge?
I haven't done it yet. Yeah. I'm such a sissy. I haven't done, I almost said something else. I've tried with, I've gone from the sauna to a cold shower. It's like, swallow my tongue, I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to work up to it.
Yeah. I've started biohacking the past year, and the doctor I'm talking to is huge on the infrared sauna. Just had it built at the house. I'm getting it installed, basically the electricity installed next week. So hopefully I'll start. And then he encouraged me to get a cold plunge as well. I already had one, but I got a kind of a nicer one. And he says at 5 p.m. every day, he sets his alarm to stop work and basically get in the infrared sauna, alternates into the cold plunge a couple of times, does a couple of other things to basically stop work for the day and shift into, family, dinner, go to bed mode. And so I'm hoping to do that. But a lot of people, you're talking about the infrared, there's a lot of research out there that light is so healing for the body. Like I have a little bit of an autoimmune condition. So they talk about that infrared being like a great way to treat the symptoms for that and reduce inflammation and all these things. So I'm super excited to
another thing you should look at, and this is good, my wife turned me onto this, and you may already know a lot about it, is grounding.
Oh yeah, just earthing, right?
Earthing.
Yeah.
It's because my first old school me. Oh right.
Yeah.
Hippie nonsense. Whatever. Just another gimmick somebody's trying to sell me. Great. Here's my $60. Leave me alone. But again, you read about it just a little bit, and it's well, that just makes nothing but that's common sense.
Yeah.
And sure enough, Lori went and got us a couple pads for our bed, mattress. That's a grounding pad. I've never slept so good.
Really?
I wake up, nothing aches, nothing stiff. Usually when I get up in the morning, either from working out or doing whatever, things are stiff and achy. And when you first get up, nothing.
So these, you plug these in and they
plug them right in.
And they're just electrically changing the field when you sleep, something like that? Okay.
You should read about it. I do a horrible job,
right?
But especially with an autoimmune disease, because it does affect that.
Okay.
Read a little bit about that.
Okay.
You'll be impressed.
Another thing the biohacker had me do was evaluate the electromagnetic radiation in my house. So like we took Wi-Fi out of the bedroom, for instance, and all these other things. That made a big difference.
Yep.
So yeah, I was kind of same as you. I was like, what do you mean? Why? Like Wi-Fi's not going to hurt me. I was like, well, you think you're macho guy. But then huge difference. Like Wi-Fi on, I feel not good. Wi-Fi off, I feel great. And so it's amazing how many things there are.
There are, and it's just like, here's another one. I don't know how many people are going to be interested in hearing about this, but there's a product, it's called bentonite. It's a mineral.
Okay. Like a binder, right?
It's all over the state of Wyoming. It's tough to get away from bentonite in Wyoming. You can't build on it. It's very unstable. It tends to be a real problem. But it's also really good for your health because it's a binding agent and you take it in and it absorbs the heavy metals, the toxicity, all the crap that you can't avoid it. If you were in this room, you're going to get it,
That's
right? But this binding agent binds with positively charged heavy metals.
Yes.
And you
Takes them right
eliminate
out of
them
you.
in waste, It's like $3 a gallon.
It's not
expensive.
It's literally
stuff.
dirt, basically, right? But it's good for you.
Very good for you.
Yeah, same thing. Did heavy metal detox. I'm still doing it actually, and then the binders help flush it out. But it's been a remarkable year for me. I've highly encouraged people to check out biohacking. Like if you haven't done it, just figure it out for yourself. You can change your life a lot just by making these little changes.
And I believe you now because I've experienced it.
Yeah.
But if you would have said that to me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been cool, Robert.
Yeah.
Good for you, man.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
Yeah. It's
true.
It's that paradigm is still changing, I think, where we're moving from that Newtonian model where we thought everything was like clockwork, billiard ball universe to it's energy, right? We're vibrational, there's a frequency to everything. So when we change frequency with light and with grounding, with EMF protection and things like this, like it actually changes your health. So.
And it's so simple. This is previously when I was cynical about things like this. It was, that's too good to be true. Well, no, it's not really too good to be true. It's just true.
It's just true.
Just basic stuff.
Yeah.
Common sense stuff, just like the grounding and the earthing. I was kind of like, honey, please, I'd rather not talk about that right now. But she keeps at me. And sure enough, I read about half a chapter and I went, what an idiot. I can't believe I was so stubborn.
I've probably kept you long enough, good sir. If you could go back in time, though, and talk to your, let's say, 18-year-old self, what wisdom or advice would you try to impart to that young man?
Whoa, there'd be so much because he was an empty vessel. Discipline. I wish I would have had more discipline, self-discipline. My father was it's not that he didn't discipline me, but I never developed the self-discipline to this day that I wish I had. And when I think back of all the things I have accomplished, and I've accomplished a lot, and I know that, I've screwed up a lot of stuff too.
Sure.
But if I would have had the discipline that I wished I would have had back then, you and I probably wouldn't be here right now. I'd be on a beach. I'd be throwing coconuts at tourists. And they'd be going, who's the old man throwing coconuts? Oh, that's Aaron Bischoff. He's crazy, but he's fun.
It's amazing to hear you say, because you have accomplished so much. So what, like, if you don't mind me prying a little more, like what is it, where do you feel like you wished you had developed discipline more in your life? Because I mean, from the outside looking in, it's like, well, you can't accomplish that much without being disciplined. So like where?
Well, I was as disciplined as I needed to be to achieve what I wanted to achieve at that time.
Okay.
I could have achieved so much more. I could have been a happier person. I could have been happier in my relationships. I would have treated people better. That's probably one of the things that deep down inside bothers me the most, especially when it comes to my parents, you know. Whew. I can't even really talk about that. I wish I would have been a better son.
I remember that.
And that's, you know, That's discipline. It's being a teenager and everything's all about you. You know, even when, for me, I was well into my 20s and 30s where everything was always about me and didn't even take the time to realize how much others were trying to contribute, even though oftentimes I wouldn't let them.
Wow.
So I wish I would have had the discipline to see and be better at human relationships.
That is damn good advice. Eric, thank you so much.
My pleasure, man. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you.
Heard a lot of
Thanks
great
for
things
coming
about
on.
you.
Yes. Lovely to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.